So you've got all these wonderful badges and you know where they go because of my last video. Now I want to show you some tips and tricks for how to sew these on. So the first thing you're going to need is thread. So you're definitely going to want a red for like the pack numbers, a darker color like a black or a navy blue, and then if you're working with a tan uniform, you probably want an olive or a tan color. These are just like grocery store threads. Like if you go to the grocery store and you see that lovely package that's for mending clothes or stuff like that, and it has like 8 different colors of thread, those are really handy when you're sewing stuff on your uniform. It's not the best thread, it's kind of a thinner thread, but it works really well, and you'll almost certainly have the color you need to match what you're sewing on in case your stitches are gonna show. But you'll see on some of these, I actually use darker color thread and the stitches show. As long as your stitches look decent, it's okay, okay? You're gonna want a needle, and it's not gonna focus on it, so I apologize. This is a really small thin needle. It's a little bent from being shoved through various patches, and that's okay. It still works just fine. The smaller, the thinner the needle, the easier it is to get through these patches for the ones that you actually have to sew through. If you start using a big eye needle or a thicker needle, it's going to be much more challenging. And I know it's harder to thread these. It's okay. You can do it. But yeah, that's what you need. Now, I also have clear thread, and they sell this at sewing stores. This is really handy because your stitches are nearly invisible. Here's the problem though, they're nearly invisible also when you're putting them in, so it's really hard to work with. It has no stretch, it just breaks if you pull too hard. And it wants to kind of come undone. It doesn't want to hold stitches tight, so it's really hard to sew with. So this is kind of my last resort. If I know my stitches are really going to show, sometimes I'll pull this out. But most of the time I just use one of the colored threads, honestly. Sharp scissors. This is really important in threading that small needle, that you have really sharp scissors. If you have dull scissors that kind of chew the thread instead of cutting it, you're going to have a much harder time of threading your needle. A stitch ripper. Everybody should own one of these. These are really handy for taking out stitches without causing a hole in whatever you're taking them out of. Especially, you may sew stuff on and realize it's in the wrong place, or it's crooked, or you may be doing something like moving or changing packs or crossing over from a pack to a troop where you need to take off those troop numbers. So definitely want one of these so you don't rip a hole in your uniform. Okay? Blue painter's tape. Most people don't know this secret, but this is really handy for taping down your patches. It works much better than pinning them, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Clear tape for those pack numbers. I'm going to show you a trick with those with clear tape. This is just a 3x5 index card. This is really handy for when I'm sewing stuff on the pocket. You could also use like a used gift card, or like cut a piece of cardboard like cereal box or something like that. You just want something that's stiff enough that is hard to sew through, okay? Now I do want to talk a minute. There's this wonderful stuff called badge magic that means you don't have to sew stuff on, and it's just 2 kind of pieces of paper with this clear double-sided adhesive stuff on it. You can use this instead of sewing. I have used it before. I don't like it very much, and the reason being is it doesn't last very long, especially if you're washing the item that you've put it on. It's not going to last more than like say a year, and then your patch is going to start peeling off. You're going to put it on the uniform, your kid's going to put on the uniform, and you're going to realize that you got patches half off. The other thing is, no matter what you do, this stuff does not come off. It leaves a nasty residue. So if you realize you put a patch in the wrong place, or now you have a different size patch to put there, you're always going to have that nasty residue. They say that there's a certain solvent that takes it off. It really doesn't take it off. So, you know, this is great as a temporary measure, but I'd really recommend just the good old-fashioned sewing. And it's really not that hard to sew. So, if you want to try it, you can, but like I said, I've tried it. I don't like it when I put on a uniform, or I see my kid put on a uniform and realize that their stuff's starting to fall off and I need to do a emergency repair on the fly. So I'd rather just sew it on because I know that's going to stay on really well. Okay, when you're sewing, there's two different types of patches you're gonna get. There's one like, focus, like this, where it has this nice border around the edge that's all embroidery border that comes right over the edge. And these are really easy to sew on because if you can see, there's this kind of all these stitching under here that when we're sewing, I can just put my needle up underneath through this kind of stitching loop that's underneath it. And that means that I don't have to actually sew through the patch. I'm just coming up off the side of the patch and going back down, and I only need to go through it either on the way up or the way back down. I don't need to do both. I can, but I don't need to. Okay, so it's really easy. These are really easy to sew on. The other really cool thing about this is my stitches don't show hardly at all. If I look right at the side, I might see them. So you don't have to worry about how your stitches look, and you don't really have to worry that much about what color thread you use. So these are going to be your happy patches to sew on. You're going to be really pleased at sewing them on compared to the other style of patch. And that is this style of patch. Come on, focus. Okay, and this style of patch doesn't have any edge, embroidery edge. It's really thin and fortunately kind of cheap, okay? When you're sewing, you're gonna wanna stay on this outside portion of it. If you try to sew through this embroidery, it's gonna be really hard. You're gonna have to be shoving that needle a lot harder. So if I stay on the outside edge, it's gonna be a lot easier, but unfortunately I have to go through the whole patch with the stabilizer backing and the fabric, so I'm gonna have to be pushing kind of hard. If I'm gonna sew something like this on, I'll frequently grab something like a magazine or something that's thick to help me push that needle through from the backside without poking my fingers, okay? So, and some of these, this one, the rank badges are a very thin patch, so they're not too hard to poke it through. Some of the other patches you end up with are much thicker by the time they have the embroidery on there and they use a thicker stabilizer on the back. You're really gonna have to push through those, and you just have to do it. This is where having that thinner needle is going to come in handy, because the thinner needle is going to be much easier to shove it through. But like I said, grab something thick, even like a heavy or a flexible magnet, like the ones you get there, like the plumbers that, you know, you're supposed to put on your fridge. Something like that that you can put on the back of the needle when you're getting ready to push it through, and push so you don't poke yourself. You can also get a thimble if you really want to, but just something you have at home will do just fine. Okay, the first thing I'm going to show you how to sew on is this shoulder patch. Okay, and that goes right up. You see that the seam is right there. You want it snug right up against the seam, kind of in the middle of, so this one comes down and right in the middle if I was to continue it. I'm going to show you a trick for how to get this on and how to get it nice and straight and keep it that way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this patch and I am going to bend it in half, okay? And I want to make kind of a crease in it, okay? And don't worry, this will come out later. Second thing I'm going to do is, and I've already done it, is I'm going to put some of that painter's tape, like a couple of loops of that painter's tape in there. And this is really good for holding the patch in place. If you try to use pins and pin it onto your uniform, what you're going to find is the patch bends one way, your uniform bends another way. You're going to pin it on, sew it all around, take those pins out, and realize that it's crooked. I've had this happen to me. It's not fun when you gotta take it back off and straighten it. It's really frustrating. So painter's tape holds it just great, okay? Bend it. Then I'm gonna take my uniform, and I don't have a brand new uniform, so I'm gonna show you on this one. I'm gonna bend that crease. So I'm gonna hold the shoulder seam, and I'm gonna go down here, and most uniforms have been folded on the shelf for a long time, so they already will have this crease. And I'm gonna bend that crease in, and kind of like you might flatten a dollar bill to put into a soda machine. I'm gonna rub it around a little bit, and that's gonna help make that crease in there. And then I'm just gonna meet the crease of my patch up with the crease that I just made. And I can even leave the shirt bent while I do this. And I'm just gonna put it on like that and stick. Okay. And then voila. All I gotta do is go around and sew that, okay? Okay, we're gonna sew on some of these numbers. Now you can see this is the first one I did. And unfortunately trying to get it straight was really hard. I also made the mistake of trying to use badge magic on this, which I didn't like. I had to take off the middle number because we changed troops or packs. I do not like this one. I don't like the gaps. It was really hard to get straight. Unfortunately, not all of these numbers are exactly the same size if you line them up. So trying to get straight and make them look nice is really, really challenging. So after I did this one, I learned a really cool trick, and I'm going to share that with you. And that is, if you'll focus, to sew these together before you put them on the shoulder, okay? So if I sew all three numbers together using like a zigzag stitch on the sewing machine, or I could just do a quick overhand stitch, I could even just tack in a few places before I sew it on, then I'm sewing on one patch. So getting them all straight is a lot easier, okay? And I'm gonna show you how to do that right now. Now, I don't have any of these numbers, so I'm gonna cheat, and I'm gonna show you with Weeblo rank badges because I happen to have a lot of those at the moment. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my clear tape, okay? And I'm gonna take a big enough piece. It doesn't matter if it's bigger. I can even take the edge of the tape thing to hold the tape down. And I am going to tape these down. Now what I want to do when I'm taping the numbers down, and remember yours are going to be numbers, is I'm going to get all those numbers nice and straight and in a row. So don't worry about the edges so much as the numbers being in a row and the embroidery being in a row, okay? So it looks really nice. I didn't do those all in the same orientation, but you get the idea, okay? Now I'm using clear tape because I'm going to leave that on, so if it shows through here, it doesn't matter. It's not going to show that well, or that much, okay? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down the center, and again, or down these lines. Just stitch. If I have needle thread, I can just do it really quickly, or I can throw it on the sewing machine. When I'm done stitching, I can then take my scissors and take that entire now big patch, and I can trim down the edges, because this is all just that cloth and stabilizer all the way to this yellow border. And on the number one, it's a red border, red with red border, so it's harder to see on camera. But I can just clip it down, and now I have one patch to sew on. And again, I'd use that trick of folding it in half, just like we did with the shoulder patch, and putting a couple of pieces of the blue tape behind it. And I just leave that blue tape there and stitch around, and it's done. Voila. Really easy. Makes it a lot easier than the trying to stitch them all separate. Okay, so now we get to the pockets. So when you buy your uniform, you can get it with this patch pre-sewn on the pocket. I personally do not. I've paid for that once, and I was really disappointed because they just take a sewing machine and sew right through this, so your pocket is sewn shut. There's a tip of how to sew it on easily without sewing through your pocket. If you don't mind having your pocket sewn shut, then you can sew right through and sew the two layers, and that's a lot easier, but then you don't have that pocket. And like I've mentioned before, my kids are all trained, so this is my daughter's uniform. She's loaning it to me so I can sew this on and show you how. But look, she earned this over 2 weeks ago. It's right in the pocket, along with some other stuff that needs sewing on her sash and stuff. But they're all right in the pocket. As soon as my kids get awards and get stuff, they put them right in one of the pockets. Now you can see this one's a little fatter than this pocket. Right? No, that one actually has some depth too. She puts them, or they've all been trained to put it right in the pocket, and that way we do not lose our patches, because nothing is more frustrating than knowing that your child has earned something and you can't find it. So I either recommend that you have a place in a bag or something. Like I have a pocket in my purse that is specifically our patch pocket. So if they hand me stuff, all awards and stuff go into that pocket in my purse. So I know that's one of the key places to look. But the even better place is right in the pocket, because that way I can grab the uniform and know that when I'm ready to sew, grab the uniform, I've already got the patch and I don't have to look a separate spot. Now, with Scout ranks, they earn these at their own pace, so she's only had this other patch for a couple of months and she's already earned her next patch. So if you're curious, this is a tenderfoot patch, and then this is second class, which is the third rank for Scouts, so we're pretty proud of her. So I'm going to take my stitch ripper, and this is where you want to have a stitch ripper. So for Cub Scouts, for the Weeblos, you will have to take off the Weeblo patch. Arrow of Light stays on, as you can see. It's the highest honor you can earn in Cub Scouting, and you get to keep that on. Okay, so I'm just going to look under here, and I'm just going to try to find where it's kind of loose. And again, this is one of those nice patches that all the stitching is behind. I didn't actually have to go through the patch. I just went through those loops in the back. So nice when you're doing it. And I just cut one, I just stick that in, and there's actually a sharp spot. So if you haven't used one of these, I'm going to take a minute and show you. Right there at the kind of crux of this is a sharp spot for cutting the thread. So if I stick this pointy bit in and then just bring the thread down, it's going to cut right there on that sharp spot. Okay, so I'm just going to take this off. So as soon as I get one off, then I can kind of keep pulling. And if you don't need to cut it, you just use that tip and pull until it's hard to pull through, and then I might cut it again, because that means your thread that you're pulling through is getting a little bit longer and harder to pull through. And you'll get to some point where it's really easy to pull these through. That one I needed to cut because it didn't want to come, but then it all starts coming undone really, really easily. And you can see the blue tape is under here. I just leave that blue tape when I use that. It's so easy, it doesn't harm anything. This shirt has been washed many times and the blue tape is just fine. No stains, no problems with it. So that's why I love the painter's tape, because I know it will last really, really well. Okay, so we've almost got that patch off. So, and then I'm gonna put her old patch, and I'm going to put it back in her uniform, because there's actually a place that she needs to put this in her notebook to save it for her record. So I'm going to put it back in there so right away it doesn't get lost. Okay, now I've got my blank pocket. Now these tan uniforms, and I think that some of the Navy now have kind of a seam right here. I guess they have kind of a second pocket that's a pen pocket that you can put a pen in from the top. That kind of makes this a little more challenging, but that's okay. So we are going to put away our stitch ripper. I'm going to take this new rank, and I am going to grab the blue tape and make a loop of blue tape. I'm going to put it on the back of that patch. And now I'm going to take that patch and I'm going to line it up right where the old one was, because if you can see that the old one has left some stitch damage, not much. If I washed it or ironed it, most of that would probably come out, but just easier to line it up. And I know I lined the first one up straight, so now I just have to follow those lines and we have a nice patch. Now, I kind of look at it. Yeah. And on the Cub Scouts, guys, I just want to point out, as far as straight patches go, your Cub Scouts are going to be running around. Cub Scouts, especially Cub Scouts in the navy blue uniforms, hardly stay still. So if it's a little crooked, nobody's going to notice. Trust me on this one. It's more when you're staring at, when you are sewing it on, that you notice. Now this is where your note card or your gift card or a cereal box, piece of cardboard, something like that come in handy. I'm going to open up the pocket and I'm going to slide this in. Now I happen to know a 3x5 card fits in here really well, and that's going to keep me from actually stitching the two layers of the pocket together. That's going to be a nice protection, okay? So that's going to keep it, if I put it right in, I want to make sure this one's a kind of a gusseted pocket on the bottom, so I want to make sure I get it right in, right underneath the layer that patch is on. Okay, now I'm going to show you a trick here with the thread. So I like to sew what is called single thread, okay, when I'm sewing on patches, because these two threads stay separate. So hopefully it will focus. So one way to sew is double threaded, where you're taking both ends of this thread and I'm knotting them together at the end. And so then I'm sewing with two threads at all times. What I like to do instead is single thread, so I'm only knotting one end. So I have the knot end, and then I've got kind of the end that I'm not using, okay? So I'm going to take that end that's the slightly longer end, that's the working tail there, the end I'm going to put a knot on. And I'm going to hold my needle, I'm going to pinch it on the eye of the needle. And again, I apologize, this isn't focusing quite right. I am going to take that working end, that end I want the knot in it, and I am going to lay it down the needle so it goes from the pointy end to the eye so that the end is right at the eye of the needle. And then I'm going to pinch that as well. So I've got that pinched at the eye of the needle. Now I'm going to wrap around my needle about 4 times. So I'm just going to coil around the needle. Now I'm going to let go. I'm going to pinch the coils. I'm going to let go of the eye, and I'm going to pull the needle through, still pinching those coils of thread, and pull it through. And that is going to give me a nice knot at the end. If you can see that. Sometimes you tie like 2 or 3 overhand knots to make this, but this is a really simple way to get a nice, neat knot at the end. Okay, I'm going to cut that again. I'm going to show you guys that one more time. Because this is a cool trick that I learned, okay? So again, pinch the eye of the needle. I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to put the working tail so that the end of the working tail, and again, I wish this would focus better, I apologize, but the end is going to go right by the eye of the needle. I'm going to pinch that end and hold it while I'm pinching the eye of the needle. So the thread goes from eye of the needle with the end right out to the tip and then keeps going. And I'm going to coil the thread around like 4 times. Then I'm going to pinch the coils and let go of the back and use that other hand to pull the needle through, just like I'm pulling a stitch through. And it, again, when we're pulling a stitch through, when we're single sewing, we want to pinch the loop of the thread right behind the eye of the needle so that the thread doesn't come unthreaded, or the needle doesn't come unthreaded. And see, really nice knot every single time with that trick. Okay. Now I'm going to cut the tail behind the knot shorter. Now, I can start sewing anywhere around this. It doesn't really matter. But I want to go, and I'm still not happy with that placement of it. I'm over a little bit. There we go. See? Okay. Just because I wanted to cover over where the old one has been because there is a little faded. And I'm just going to put my needle in. And actually, you know what? I'm going to start right at the bottom because it'll be easier to see. So I'm not even going to worry about that first stitch. I'm not even going through the thing. The patch. I just want to put that needle through and get the knot to be somewhere where it's going to be hidden under the patch, okay? Hidden under the edge, because I don't want that knot to show. Okay? Now when I go back through, this time I'm going to go through the fabric. But again, I've got that card behind here, so I'm feeling the index card. I'm going to go through the fabric, just that top layer, and then I'm going to come out those loops underneath. Okay, and remember I said you only have to go through those loops in one direction, so you decide which one's easier for you. I like coming out, and then when I come back over here, again, I'm not going to go through the patch, I'm just going to go through the fabric, and then come back out. Okay, and your stitches on this do not need to be at all close together. Centimeter, half a centimeter, somewhere in there. Doesn't matter. Again, these are the easy patches to sew on because you can't see the stitching. And again, through the fabric, up through the side of the patch. And I'm just going to keep working my way around, and that card in there is going to keep me from stitching through too many layers of fabric. I'm only going to be able to stitch through the one. Okay, so when I get to the end of sewing this, I could do 3 stitches right on top of each other. Just put it in and make sure all 3 loops of the stitches are one on top of the other, stacked them. And this previous stitch is going to be held in by the next stitch, and that's a really cool quilting technique. But I want to make sure that I can actually take this off and take out all the stitches so I can replace this when she earns the next ring patch. So I'm going to show you a different way because the 3 stitches is hard to take out. It's good on the Cub Scout one where we don't have to take those patches off. I'm going to do a loop and put my needle through just like I'm doing like an overhand knot. And then I'm going to kind of work that loop all the way down until it's just right next to my piece. And I can kind of use my finger to let it run down. Now I'm going to put the tip of my needle right where that thread's coming out. And just poke in and just hold it like it's a flagpole or something. Now, when I pull that knot, the knot's going to go all the way down to the tip of the needle, and it's going to want to tie in right where the tip of the needle was. And then I just kind of lifted the needle out and tie in it a little bit more, and then I'm going to do it a second time. So I'm going to make another loop and go through just like I'm doing an overhand knot. And again, I'm going to put the needle in right where I want it, and I'm going to pull that tight and make it walk down the needle, and then I will have my knots. Okay, so I know with the other ring patches that you get for Cub Scouts, they do not actually have that nice border on them, but you're going to do the same thing that you would have done with the patch I sewed on. You're going to put in like a 3x5 card. And again, I know a 3x5 card's just about the right size to get in there perfectly. Okay. And it looks like I caught the tiger one at some point. But you can see I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to do little stitches, and these are going to show. But if I get the right color thread, like this bear one, I found the right color thread and it doesn't show at all. The tiger one, I found the right color thread. I had the red thread. I just didn't have the right thread with the bobcat, and it doesn't matter because the stitches really don't show. Like right here, it's focused, it shows. When my kid's wearing this, you don't see that at all. You really don't see the stitches. So again, put something in the pocket like a gift card, as long as it holds right behind where you're sewing, and just overhand stitch around that. And that's a really easy way to put that on. Okay, so those were some helpful tips and tricks for how to sew things on your uniform, especially in those challenging spots, and get them straight. I can't say enough about using the tape behind it. It really helps to stick it down and to keep it nice and straight and in place while you're sewing. Again, I have tape under every single one of these and no problems just leaving it there and forgetting about it even through the wash. So hopefully that helps you to sew if you're starting out with a brand new uniform, and you have multiple things to sew on. Take your time and do them one sitting at a time. Sew on one thing when you're getting tired or starting to get frustrated. Walk away. Major tip, if you're tired and you're trying to rush to finish it, you're not going to do a good job. It's going to come out crooked and you're going to have to do twice as much work.